Hello. So the subject I'm going to be discussing here is something that I've touched on before, but I want to limit it to not public figures in general, not well-known famous people in general, but specifically to the realm of pop stars and to a lesser extent actors. But I think it's particularly relevant in the music industry. Now, before I get on to that, this isn't entirely connected, but it's not entirely unconnected. And that was the sad news today that Sir Bruce Forsyth has passed away at the age of 89. Um, he may not be that well known outside the UK, but within the UK, he's a household name. He was a long running television presenter, in fact, probably one of the longest running in this country's history. He became a household name for his quips. He was basically seen as the king of Saturday night television and very unique character. And that was big news today that Bruce Forsyth has passed away. Now, what I want to discuss actually is on the theme of super fandom, if I could put it that way. I came across an old video clip from 1991, London Weekend Television, and it caught my attention because it was discussing the author of this book, Elvis, The Last 24 Hours. The author is one Albert Goldman, who passed away in, I believe, 1994. But he was controversial because he made claims about famous figures, particularly Elvis Presley and John Lennon. And in the case of both singers, two of the most iconic singers of the 20th century, he made some very controversial claims. Now, in this particular book, he theorizes that Elvis committed suicide. The book is unpopular. I don't know if the sale's done so well, so I don't know how I got my hands on it, but I haven't read it in full. But anyway, Dr. Goldman was sort of speaking via satellite, and there was this live studio audience. Now, a large proportion of them were Elvis fans, and they were very vocal Elvis fans. So this doctor or this writer was theorizing that there was another biographer there that rubbished his work. The ratio of those against him was definitely a lot stronger. Now, what I found interesting was there was one woman who kind of played the devil's advocate to defend this guy, and he was having a real struggle doing it himself. But she said, "You people are attacking him. You haven't even read the book." Um, and I think she made a point, but a good point. And then they started shouting her down as well, and that's literally what it was. And it got me thinking about the idea of how frankly hysterical superfans can get over pop stars, occasionally over actors, and occasionally sports stars, but it's particularly obvious with pop stars and famed musicians. Now, this last few days, of course, has been the 40th anniversary of the death of Elvis Presley. I've been watching documentaries, listening to his music. I wouldn't say I'm a huge Elvis fan, but I'm into his music. I think he was a very talented man. He was the king, you know. Um, you'd have to be hard pushed to find someone that hates the music of Elvis. There'll be people who are not a fan, but I can't think of many people that actually actively dislike his music. And he was a crossover artist, and I don't need to say anything that hasn't already been said, except one little side caveat, which is quite interesting. I only discovered this in the last few days. One reason Elvis Presley never toured outside the United States may well be down to Colonel Tom Parker. Colonel, which was an epithet title, it wasn't actually, he was never a military man, was of course Elvis's manager. He was a Dutch born national, and so he would have actually been operating under a legal status had he went abroad to be Elvis's manager on a sort of tour. So that's something I'd never thought of before. Elvis actually never toured outside the United States. Um, so that was interesting. But this idea of super fans, I find that there is a personality cult around celebrities. Now, at the end, the host pointed out, I don't know, I recognize the host, but I forget his name. He pointed out, look, Elvis was a man, he was not a demigod. And they got worked up by that. Oh, we know that. But the problem is they're not acting like they know it, they're acting like hysterical fanatical people who will shout down anyone who disagrees. And that's what I really dislike about superfans. And you get them with a lot of big stars. Michael Jackson had his. Um, Elvis obviously has his. I mean, there's probably many other examples. I'm only saying them because they happen to be some of the best known entertainers of the last century. You get it in other fields. I've long argued that you get it in the sport of boxing with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali had many faults, but you dare talk about those things. You dare point out some basic facts. You know, people round on you that you're a charlatan or a blasphemer. So this sort of collective cognitive response that people seem to have with celebrity is very, you could write a whole thesis on it. I think it's really it's interesting, but it's also unsettling just how crazy people can get. And it's this sheep-like quality of not thinking for themselves, letting their fandom become such that they really do treat the person like a living god. And they denied it, but that's exactly how they were behaving. I invite you to watch the video. I might put a link to it here if I can. Um, if I was a successful public figure in any art form, whether it was acting or singing or sports or anything else, of course, fan loyalty would be wonderful, and I'd always be grateful for my fans. But I also wouldn't want a situation where my fans got overly crazy in defending me. If another public figure criticized me, I'd have it out with them, and I'd appreciate the loyalty, but I wouldn't necessarily like that to be done in my name because I don't approve of personality cults myself, and that's what it essentially is. So this concept of super fandom, where people just cannot comprehend that what bugs me about it is they really do think they know the person personally. They fail to recognize that the person they know is the public figure. They're not with that person all the time. And yet, what I find interesting is people who are confidants of the person, who sometimes are family members or close friends. If they say something that the fans don't like, the fans round on them as if they know better than that person, as if they hadn't been up close in the way that person may have been. So this is something that I really don't like, and you get it sometimes with when it becomes a celebrity's word against her accuser. I mean, I said it with Mel Gibson when his Russian girlfriend was making accusations against him. I looked at that video, and I'm not saying that she was innocent. I don't think she is entirely innocent, but the fans were really like Mel Gibson fans are rounding up and saying, all these sorts of things. She's a gold digger. She only wants this. She only wants that, and they were being totally sympathetic to him without trying to think rationally about any of it. I mean, it was all the spontaneous sort of, well, she must be this because she's attacking the guy that we admire as a filmmaker, as an actor, and yet they're not there. They're not in his house. They don't know what goes on beyond the scope of TMZ. So it's one thing that bugs me about these sort of super fans that they really do think they know everything, and they don't. They just don't. Um, so something that I find interesting, but it also makes me uncomfortable. And you get it. Unfortunately, it is still very apparent. I'm not sure if it will ever go away because celebrities from, let's say, the 50s onwards, are almost like the equivalent of royalty in countries where there is not a royal family. There's a certain regal mindset, a certain not with them, but with the fandom around them, and it is an interesting phenomenon. But I will always contend that no historical figure, living or dead, is above criticism, is above scrutiny. There are people I greatly admire for one reason or another, but I would concede that they're not. They have their faults, and there are some areas I don't particularly approve of that I think they could have done differently or whatever. But the thing about super fandom is there's no scope for reason. There's no scope for they're human beings. And if it was just in of themselves, that would be one thing. But the point about these people is they're willing to be aggressive, to use bullying tactics, to shout people down and sometimes even use violence. Um, so it really is, I've no respect for such people. I've no problem with people who are big fans of someone, you know. I'd be a hypocrite if I said there wasn't certain artists and people I admire. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, I'm a huge fan of his. But I'm not going to sort of round on a journalist who might criticize DiCaprio over something because he's he's his own man. He can defend himself. I admire him as an actor. I think he's probably the greatest actor ever, quite possibly. But that's beside the point. The point I'm trying to raise here is that you can admire someone without, being so sycophantic, without being so feeling that you have to forcefully defend them. Now, it's one thing, I'm not saying that fans shouldn't defend their, I don't want to say idol, I don't even like that word, but the person they admire, it's natural that they would want to defend them, but they should do it in a civil way. If the person criticizing it is, I could understand if the person doing the criticizing is quite vitriolic themselves. Okay, well then I suppose they need to expect a bit of a backlash. But when they're simply asking questions as a journalist or an investigative author, then the way I see it is the way you win arguments is by intelligent adult debate, not just shouting people down, not ganging up on people. I've never had time for that, ever. Even if their argument is factually correct, it looks ugly. It looks bullying. It looks unpleasant, and I don't like it. So I'll put a link to this, and this is just the basis that I'm going on. I'm not defending Albert Goldman. I think probably he is not the most reliable source based on what I know from him. I haven't read this book in full, but there are some flaws in his position, and it has been alleged that his motivation is a personal dislike of Elvis Presley. Now that obviously would make his work flawed. Um, there's certain public figures I dislike, and I would have to accept then if I was to write a biography of them, people would run that into question. I cannot stand Jeremy Kyle. Now, if I was to write a book about Jeremy Kyle, people would say, oh, well, you don't like the guy, and it's well known you don't like the guy, so that's your vested interest going on there. Right, so those are just a few things I want people to think about. But if you are a super fan, that's fine in of itself. There's nothing wrong with admiring someone's music and admiring them as a person. But if you're the sort of super fan who aggressively wants to shout people down, you get no respect from me. I think that's a sheepish, cowardly way to behave. And I think you need to get your own life and just step back a little bit and just hit reality because the person that you're looking up to is a human being. They're not above criticism, right? And it's not your job to defend them. Okay, thanks for watching and let me know your thoughts. I'll try and put a link to that video.